Prelude to a Dream. To pass a law and to fundamentally change the culture of a country are two very different things, yet are too often conflated. If passing a law meant transforming hearts and minds, then there would be no crime, no need to rally, to march, to resist. Let us agree then that laws are not magic, merely guidelines and aspirations, blueprints with consequences. Only the actions of people can transmogrify circumstances, correct the projection of a life's trajectory. That's why the motto is fair housing makes us stronger, not the Fair Housing Act makes us stronger. An act, fair or not, is no consolation for the death of a king. We would have never chosen to bargain our soul for the recognition of our humanity to this day. The promises in that contract, signed in Martin's blood, are yet to be fully realized. But where laws, contracts, clever mottos, and nowadays even logic have failed, maybe story will be capable of opening even the most closed of minds and restoring humanity to spaces smothered by the bottom line. A single mother of an unfavorable hue is attempting the great American illusion. This magic trick has never been easy. No one ever taught her how to abracadabra her family from one side of the tracks to the other. She sees the miracle that could transform her family's future in the form of better schools and job opportunities. But her 750 credit score is attached to an application with a name that sounds too dark for the white side of town. As her spirit is cut in half by the blade of discrimination, her American dream is disappearing. When ignorance seems to always be in demand, who needs crooked laws to draw red lines in the sand? Wounded warrior, welcomed home, where we further wilt the tethered strands of the American flag draped over the coffins of those not lucky enough to make it back, only to face discrimination. The only home he can afford is not built to carry the weight of his sacrifice. No ramp, just faded glory. Our most vulnerable populations are waiting for us to engage. What does it say when America can no longer provide homes for the brave? There are a million stories just like this, each representing a fundamental glitch in a system accepted by a country still attempting to reach its full potential. First, we must open ourselves up to receive. Accept that just because something isn't happening to us doesn't mean it isn't happening. Just because we didn't create the system doesn't make us innocent, especially if we choose to profit from it. The truth is all around, while the ability to change resides inside us. In the end, it comes down to choices. Will you be silent, or will you use your power and privilege to give voice to the voiceless?
In 1934, the Federal Housing Administration was established, followed by the Homeowners Loan Corporation in 1935. The intention was to help prop up Americans suffering in the wake of the Great Depression by creating a system to regulate interest rates and the term mortgages that it insured. And it did, making home prices affordable for every man, requiring nothing more than 10% interest. But these mortgages were only available to whites.
This was explicit. It was written into the FHA's underwriting standards under the pretense that we, as minorities, would lower the property values and create too much risk for its insurance policies on those houses.
And so maps were drawn up of cities, color-coded by neighbors, green designated as best, blue as still favorable, yellow as definitely declining, and red as hazardous. Now, this direct from the FHA manual. Yellow areas are characterized by age, obsolescence, and infiltration of a lower grade population. The presence of influences which increase sales resistance, as well as neighborhoods lacking in homogeneity. Red areas are characterized by pronounced degree of an undesirable population or infiltration of it. the maps categorized these areas by race, determining on a racial basis what neighborhoods should and should not get approved for loans, and therefore what people should and shouldn't get loans. The FHA manual goes on. Incompatible racial groups should not be permitted to live in the same communities. A mindset that echoed the realtor's own code of ethics from 1924 said, a realtor should never be instrumental in introducing into a neighborhood members of any race or nationality whose presence will clearly be detrimental to property value in that neighborhood.
The result was that whites were subsidized to move out of cities and into the suburbs, while minorities, like us, were explicitly barred from the same opportunities, and as a result, cast further and further and further aside.
The history of fair housing is the history of individuals fighting to unify our communities against the systemic pressure to separate us. It's a history of over 100 years of people speaking out against voices that attempt to silence them, trying, even still today, to bring us together. These are just some of the voices, their words, the milestones in the journey towards equality.
1947. 3 African-American war veterans sued the MetLife Company for refusing to sell them housing within a newly developed community called Stuyvesant Town. It was nominally built for veterans in particular.
Joseph Dorsey, one of the 3 men who brought the suit.
Back when we were still overseas, anytime we had some downtime, we dream about coming home. We dream about the houses we come home to. Blue shingles, a simple white fence, a small stone walkway to the front door with a tiny dogwood in the yard, and a navy mailbox with the name Dorsey written in cursive. We've seen violence, survived violence. It seemed only fair that when we got home, the American dream we'd fought for could be ours too. But that just wasn't the case. We came home and here was this great new community called Stuyvesant Town, a community they built specifically for us veterans. This was that place we dreamed of, and in our minds fought for. But they wouldn't let us live there. Why not? Hadn't we sacrificed enough? Hadn't we done our service? Where then was our country's duty to serve us, where we was willing to serve as we did for it?
The reason the MetLife Company gave for barring Dorsey: Negroes and whites just do not mix.
Justice Felix C. Benvenga, who ruled on the case, said, clearly housing accommodation is not a civil right, nor a violation to refuse such accommodation on the grounds of race, color, or religion.
1948, a white man, Louis Kramer, sues the Shelleys, a black family, to prevent them from purchasing a property in his neighborhood.
J.D. Shelley.
I couldn't keep my wife and my 6 kids down south any longer. People were getting lynched for things as little as looking at someone the wrong way. All over the place, we were being killed. They would advertise in the newspapers, showing up in the thousands to watch like some grotesque sporting event, dismembering corpse for souvenirs. How could we stay down there? Who in their right minds would stay? And so we fled. We fled up north, where we thought we'd be safe, where we could believe we could start a life and be free.
What Shelley didn't realize was that in 1911, the house and the neighborhood had been placed under a legally approved racial covenant, stating, hereafter, no part of said property shall be occupied by any person not of the Caucasian race, it being intended hereby to restrict the use of said property against occupancy as owners or tenants by members of the Negro or Mongolian people.
In a landmark decision reversing a history of legally ratified racism, the Supreme Court ruled 6-0 in favor of Shelley.
1964. But even as the legal walls of segregation are beginning to crumble, the de facto walls are being buttressed by those whose desire to maintain the separation of our communities.
The real estate industry was integral in perpetuating this separation, ramping up its campaigns against equal rights by distributing what were called forced housing kits, including brochures and posters, press releases, suggested speeches and publicity programs, all portraying fair housing as an encroachment on white rights.
NAR was actively pressuring its constituents to vote against fair housing policy, a policy that would have brought equality to over 20 million people.
1966, two senators, Walter Mondale and Edward Brooke, introduced a fair housing amendment to Congress.
There is unconscionable bitterness between white and black Americans. It is incumbent upon our government to act and to act now. Fair housing does not promise an end to the ghetto. It promises only to demonstrate that the ghetto is not an immutable institution in America.
(1967). 159 race riots erupt over the course of the year, sweeping from coast to coast and city to city. Atlanta, Boston, Cincinnati. Police opened fire on civilians in Buffalo. 43 people died in Detroit, including a 4-year-old girl named Tanya Blanding, as she was huddled in her living room.
The riots were so ubiquitous, so frequent, that President Johnson issued an executive order to put together a commission to investigate the causes. It became known as the Kerner Commission after its chair, Governor Otto Kerner Jr. of Illinois. Now, after 7 months of investigation, Kerner found that one of the major sparks that ignited the riots was lack of access to reasonable housing.
Otto Kerner.
We have visited the rioted cities. We have heard many witnesses. We have sought the counsel of experts across the country. This is our basic conclusion. Our nation is moving towards two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Discrimination and segregation have long permeated much of American life. They now threaten the future of every American. The deepening racial division is not inevitable. The movement apart can be reversed. What white Americans have never fully understood, but what the Negro can never forget, is that white society is deeply implicated in the ghetto. White institutions created it, white institutions maintain it, and white society condones it.
(1968).
NBC interrupts its regular program schedule to bring you the following special report.
Martin Luther King Jr. was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee, shot in the face as he stood alone on the balcony of his hotel room. He died in a hospital an hour later. Martin Luther King's crusade for civil rights, patterned on the philosophy of non-resistance propounded by Mohandas Gandhi, began when his
Sometimes words are not enough to change the world. Sometimes, no matter how much you plead or how loud you protest, you still cannot get people to listen to you. No matter how many miles you march or the number of loved ones you lose, sometimes people will still not listen. Sometimes it takes a tragedy so incomparable, a public slaughtering of the soul of a people, to convince people to change.
On an April afternoon in the year 1966, I asked a distinguished group of citizens that were interested in human rights to meet me in the cabinet room in the White House. In their presence that afternoon, I signed a message to the Congress. That message called for the enactment, and I quote, of the first effective federal law against discrimination in the sale and the rental of housing in the United States of America. Few in the nation, and the record will show that very few in that room that afternoon, believed that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip. We did not get it in 1966. We pled for it again in 1967, but the Congress took no action that year. We asked for it again this year, and now, at long last, this afternoon, its day has come. I do not exaggerate when I say that the proudest moments of my presidency have been times such as this, when I have signed into law the promises of a century.
Everett Dirksen said, signing the Civil Rights Act, "Stronger than all the armies is an idea whose time has come." But the truth was that the Fair Housing Act, for all its promises to deliver a final blow to inequality, had no teeth. A provision had been added to the bill, applying its powers only to those who use a real estate agent, meaning anyone who chose to operate outside the industry had free rein to continue to discriminate as they liked.
And that loophole would be just one of many loopholes to follow the Fair Housing Act that continue to plague the minority communities in their search for housing for years to come.
What is the difference between then and now? When does an era end? If the civil rights era is over, does that mean everything they fought for has been won? If I can touch my parents, and they can still touch memories of sharecropping and Jim Crow and redlining and fire hoses and picket signs and burning crosses, if my father can still touch the images of his friends being fired upon with live ammunition at a campus protest in 1968, tell me, when does then end and now begin? Those are just memories. Today, in this country, when it comes to practices of housing discrimination, now is still then for far too many groups of people. We are here to commemorate and to celebrate the advancements made in fair housing, but more importantly, we are here to learn. To do that effectively, we must make the past ever present in any discussion of the future. We can only make amends for then if we fight to never let it happen again.
There's been a lot of great advances over the years. We've come a long way.
And we should be proud of the steps we've taken, of how we've advanced as a more tolerant and inclusive society and association. We may look at ourselves as a post-racial society, but if you're saying that, what you're missing is that the history of social engineering, of government-sponsored segregation, has built a wall between our societies. It was not equal then, and as a result, it continues to not be equal now. President Johnson said this in a commencement address to Howard University in 1968.
You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bringing up to the starting line of a race, and then say, you are free to compete with all the others, and still justly believe that you have been completely fair.
Those lines drawn on maps were a method of separating us, quarantining us, shoving us somewhere out of sight where we would be forgotten. We were restricted economic opportunities, educational opportunities, and collected in pens where the poverty that was forced upon us could flourish. And so, what happens? You get this.
This is a map of Baltimore's crime rates by neighborhood. Now just look how it overlaps with the redlining maps. The wall that divides us still remains. The lines that were drawn by diplomats nearly 100 years ago still affect us today.
What the redlining created were areas to be ignored, forgotten, wastelands. Here's Philadelphia's red line map compared to a map of areas where the land has known or suspected pollution, soil contamination, or hazardous waste.
Is it any wonder that the people who live in these neighborhoods live 20 years less than those who live in well-to-do neighborhoods? The red line remains.
And this is not exclusive to African Americans. Every single one of us knows someone who's had to deal with housing discrimination.
A father,
An uncle,
A sister,
A partner,
A friend.
what hundreds of years of de facto and legislative discrimination didn't understand and still doesn't understand is that we're stronger when we live together.
We are, all of us, more alike than we're different. An artist in Brazil has been documenting the spectrum of human skin tones. And it's beautiful to see such wonderful variety of pigments. Pinks and peaches, reds, oranges, browns. But when you take it all together, and you take away the lines that separate us, it's impossible to tell where one group begins and another ends. We're more alike than we're different.
So if you believe that we all deserve the same rights, the same opportunities to live and love and to thrive, then we need to continue to fight for that equality, because if you think that the fight is over and won, then you're wrong.
we've been on the wrong side of history in the past. But we, as realtors, have the unique opportunity now to be the force pushing the right side of history moving forward.
We have to make this universal so that all people, blacks, whites, Latinos families, gay, straight, transgender, able-bodied, handicapped, everyone gets equal protections in every single state in this country. Thank you.